one of the most frustrating things for me, and frankly, embarrassing things, embarrassing tendencies that I see among Muslims today, especially online, especially on social media, particularly in the English language Muslim social media, Twitter and so forth, is this reflexive obsession with sharing and amplifying the words of Westerners, usually white men, whenever they say something that sounds vaguely pro-Palestinian or critical of Israel or pro-Muslim, or even vaguely anti-imperialist. The moment one of them says, Israel maybe shouldn't be killing children, well, Muslims flood their pages, repost their statements, and act like the gates of justice have finally creaked open because someone important has finally spoken, as if their voices make our cause valid. This is a colonized mind at work, in my opinion. It's the internalized inferiority that still sees the white Western man as the ultimate judge of what's right and what's wrong and what's important, as if the truth needs to be echoed by the empire itself before it becomes truth. Look, they have a remarkable knack for being able to say something that's true while still lying. Bear that in mind. Because listen, we cannot trust anything that they say. That's a fact. The history of the Western world is a history of lies, of betrayal, mass murder, moral hypocrisy on an industrial scale. They have never stood with the oppressed without a hidden agenda. Not once, not ever. When they speak, they are not speaking to you. They're not speaking for you. And you can never let them do that. And furthermore, they're not speaking with you or to you. They are speaking to each other, for each other. You understand? When Western non-Muslims are talking to each other, well, that's a team meeting. It's a strategy briefing. Adjustments to the narrative. Calibration of tactics. That's all that is. They're managing the optics of empire. They never have a team meeting except to plan on how they can get the upper hand on every other team, which is us. Never look for validation from your enemies. If you do that, you're going to make the grave mistake of thinking that maybe they're not even your enemies anymore at all, just because they say some things that you agree with. But if you're clear on the fact that they are your enemies, and you should be, then you'll understand that this is nothing but a tactic. They're not on your side, no matter how much you might like what they say, no matter how true it seems. They're just learning your language, your emotional language, your ideological language, your moral language. Because you can't propagandize people except in their own language. You can't deceive people except in their own language. You can't make a sales pitch except in the language of the one you're trying to sell to. You understand? So they adopt your language, your moral language, your sentiments, your rhetoric, your posture. They mimic your sympathies as a tactic just to get close to you. I'm telling you, when Western non-Muslims, when they say anything at all, well, you should treat it like there's someone talking in a police investigation and you're the investigator, And you should treat it like you already have a whole file of evidence in your hands about them, because you do. You have the Qur'an, you have the Sunnah, you have the Hadiths, And another meaning of the word ayat is evidence, is proof. We already have a massive file about the non-Muslims, about the Kuffar. And everything that they say has to be weighed against that evidence. We know you're lying, but we can learn a lot about someone by how they lie and about what. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already warned you directly, unambiguously, that the Jews and the Christians will never be pleased with you until you follow their way. Well, understand that this isn't just about belief. This isn't just about religion. It's just not only about aqidah. It's about power. It's about systems. This is about allegiance and loyalty. You'll never win their approval unless and until you bow to their worldview, to their narratives, till you adopt their frameworks and their priorities, until you follow their way, not only spiritually, but politically, economically, and ideologically. But here you are thinking that if some celebrity or some, well-known person, some politician in the West just throws you a crumb of empathy, well, it means that the tide is turning. No, it means that they are adapting their language just to keep you hooked, to keep you docile, to keep you impressed, and still waiting for their approval, still treating them as important, treating their approval and their support as decisive, but it isn't. I mean, let me remind you, the West didn't even support Nelson Mandela until he was no longer a threat. They didn't care about the brutality of colonialism until they could no longer profit from it, until they had to come up with a new way to do it. They didn't oppose apartheid until it was economically inconvenient, until they couldn't profit from that. They won't stand with Palestine unless and until they can figure out how to do it without threatening their own power structure. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. That's exactly why we're seeing what we're seeing now. Because the A-National OCGFC have gotten on board with the new regional vision for the Middle East. They're not doing it for moral reasons. They're not doing it for reasons of conscience. They're doing it for reasons of power and profit. They'll never give up or substitute any evil method for self-enrichment unless someone can come up with a different way of doing it, or else when they have no choice. They don't give up on evil unless maintaining that evil becomes unsustainable. So understand, this is not solidarity, this is strategy on their part. No, we don't need their validation. The truth of our cause is not contingent upon their acknowledgement. The justice of our struggle is not a matter of what's trending in Western media. Our legitimacy doesn't come from their institutions, it comes from the haqq, from the divine command to stand against oppression, not opinion polls, from the Quranic duty to resist aggression. So you need to shake off this desperation for their acceptance. Stop retweeting your colonizer's sympathy. Stop praising his tardy outrage. Stop centering his voice in your resistance. This is not empowerment. This is obsequiousness in disguise. We're not waiting for the empire to approve our liberation. You understand me? We're not pleading for inclusion within their warped sense of morality. We're not guests at their table. That table was built with our bones. And it's got our resources laid out on that table. You know, a good example of what I'm talking about. Actually, this is even what brought it up, is Jeffrey Sachs. I've seen so many people sharing Jeffrey Sachs clips, like he's some great advocate for justice. Well, you'd have to be born yesterday to think that Jeffrey Sachs is an advocate for justice. He has a long history. He didn't just spring into existence when Russia invaded Ukraine or after October 7th, 2023. Jeffrey Sachs is no friend of the Global South. He's not an anti-imperialist. He's not a humanitarian savior. Never was. Sachs is and always has been a technocratic servant of imperial domination, an enabler of elite capture, a functionary of global financialized capital. He always has been. He's a chameleon of narrative who adapts only as the aesthetic of control evolves. You know, Sachs' current image as a champion of peace and multipolarity is not a rupture from his past. It's the logical evolution of a figure strategically positioned to maintain systemic control over sovereign nations under new but less militaristic costumes. He's a mouthpiece for the A-National OCGFC. I mean, let me give you some history here, because you may not know. Sachs rose to fame as a young economist from Harvard by designing and promoting what's referred to as shock therapy for developing countries. The rapid liberalization of markets, the removal of subsidies, mass privatization and deregulation, neoliberalism. These are not humanitarian reforms. This is textbook neoliberal interventions designed to break the back of sovereign state economies and to pave the way for foreign capital takeover, for foreign investors. Let's be clear. In 1985, Sachs' Plan Bolivia helped to crash inflation in Bolivia, but he devastated the working class in that country. He destroyed public services, and he opened the door to foreign exploitation. This was an experiment in neoliberal social engineering. And then in Poland, in like 1989, 1990, Sachs oversaw a similar restructuring campaign, causing mass unemployment, vanishing pensions, foreign corporate penetration, all under the guise of economic freedom. Then in Russia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union in like 1991, Sachs helped to create the conditions in Russia for the rise of the oligarchy class and the largest transfer of public wealth into private hands in modern history in Russia. In each case, Jeffrey Sachs acted as an instrument of Western financial colonization, enforcing what was then called the Washington Consensus, with outcomes that entrenched poverty, entrenched and worsened inequality, and destroyed state capacity. This is not a man who ever stood with the oppressed. He stood with capital, and he still does. As the narrative around global control began to shift from brute force neoliberalism to, ESG rhetoric, green capitalism, and so on, technocratic internationalism, Sachs shifted right along with it. He's not a comrade, he's a chameleon. He entered the United Nations system. He became the director of the Millennial Project and started advocating for the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Well, these goals aren't anti-imperialist. They're just imperialism with a smile. It's a way of subordinating global South countries to the global elite's technocratic framework. The SDGs were drafted by the same institutions that imposed structural adjustment reforms, and for the same reasons. They're managed through corporate partnerships and through foundations, private foundations, many of which have private stakes in extracting wealth from the global south, whether through mineral contracts or data harvesting or greenwashing. Okay, so he opposes military interventions now, not because he opposes violence, but because the OCGFC, the A-national OCGFC, now prefer to use soft power. He's in favor of investment as invasion rather than armed occupation. Jeffrey Sachs didn't switch sides. The side that he's on simply evolved in its approach. So now Jeffrey Sachs, now he's a regular speaker at BRICS events. He praises China. He decries NATO. He speaks the language of multipolarity. But this support is not solidarity and it's not sincerity. It's opportunistic harmonization with the shifting centers of elite power. That's all it is. Jeffrey Sachs realizes and recognizes the reality that the age of US-led unipolarity is fading. The A-national OCGFC-led system is positioning itself through digital finance, through global governance, and through the creation of these regional economic blocs. This is the new global order, global financial partnerships and what have you. So he attaches himself to this new discourse, not to resist empire, but to manage it as it changes shape, as this shift and this transition takes place, as I've talked about many times. His advocacy for multipolarity is not rooted in any love for the dignity of the global south. It's just technocratic pragmatism, designed to try to keep him relevant as a narrative manager in the emerging architecture of the A-national OCGFC and their control system. He doesn't advocate for self-determination. He advocates for elite integration. He calls for peace, but only under the terms of those who already dominate. You understand? The most dangerous imperialists are not the ones who drop bombs on cities. They're the ones who convince the oppressed that their chains are golden bracelets, and that's what Jeffrey Sachs does. He did more long-term damage to the global south with his clipboard than most generals could ever do with tanks and bombs. He entrenched foreign dependency. He entrenched economic servitude behind a facade of fiscal reform. The IMF repackaged imperialism as development, and now he sells it again as sustainability. He's not a break from empire. He's just part of the public relations department of empire. He's a salesman of domination in the era of humanitarian capitalism. He's just moving alongside the center of gravity as it shifts to the global south. And he's doing that to protect the same interests that he served when the center of gravity was in the west. Sachs is not your ally. He's just the technocrat that the empire sends when bombs are no longer useful, no longer fashionable. His current language of peace, equity, sustainability, multipolarity, and so on, is built on the ruins of the countries that he helped to dismantle. No matter what costume he wears, neoliberal architect, UN envoy, BRICS guest speaker, he serves the same structure. The same structure that he helped to build, to protect, and now to recalibrate. Jeffrey Sachs is not an anti-imperialist. He's just an ambassador of the newest version of imperialism. But I think part of why we get confused about people like Jeffrey Sachs, aside from, like I say, our own colonized mindset, is this whole thing about Islamophobia, which is a word that Muslims didn't even coin ourselves, but we quickly adopted it. And with it, we adopted a whole framework of thinking that has, in my opinion, distorted our understanding of the world around us and our relationship with non-Muslims. See, the term Islamophobia implies that only some non-Muslims have a problem with Islam. It frames their hostility as an irrational fear, a kind of social prejudice like racism or xenophobia. And this whole concept fits very nicely among liberals who like to think that racism and xenophobia are exclusively the pathologies of right-wingers. So it makes us think the same way. It frames our relationship with non-Muslims along the left-right socio-political dividing lines of the West. The right is against us, the left is on our side. And we know that the left is on our side because they call the right Islamophobes. That makes them our allies. But this is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us, how to understand the reality of this relationship that we have with the non-Muslims. We don't need a new vocabulary. We already have the correct term, and it's not Islamophobe, it's Kuffar. Those who knowingly reject the truth and try to cover the truth. Allah has already told us very clearly how they feel about us, no matter which side of the Western political, socio-political spectrum that they sit on. They will not cease to fight you until they turn you back from your religion if they're able. That's what Allah told us. He said that hatred has already appeared from their mouths, from their words, and what their hearts conceal is far worse. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said that they are allies one of another. And if you don't do the same, be allies, then there will be great fitna in the land and corruption. No, this isn't about a phobia. It's not about a fear of Islam. This is about rejection of Islam, rejection of the truth, and hostility to Islam and to the truth, opposition to the truth. Whether they express that through bombs or through books, through war or through law, through mockery or through policy, through rhetoric or through comedy, it doesn't matter. It all stems from the same place, which is Kuffar, disbelief. So stop saying Islamophobia. It's a misunderstanding that we need to correct because it's warping our own worldview. The most dangerous result of using this term is that it has tricked Muslims into thinking that there are Islamophobes among non-Muslims and there are allies among non-Muslims. That some Kuffar are our enemies and other Kuffar are standing with us. But that's not the paradigm that the Qur'an teaches us. We do not have allies amongst them. They are allies of each other and we are one ummah. And if you don't grasp that, then you're just setting yourself up for betrayal, for disappointment, and for co-optation. I'm not saying that we have to treat all non-Muslims as enemies. No. But just the fact that I even have to say that. The reason I have to say that is because you and I both know that non-Muslims are going to jump on what I said and maliciously misinterpret it, which is an antagonistic reflex. We don't operate on that caveman binary of either friend or foe. You're either with us or against us. We simply know that you have characteristics that are connected to your kufr, traits and qualities and pathologies that are causally connected to your state of disbelief that creates these kinds of antagonistic reflexes in you against us. We don't feel that way towards you. Allah said, it's you who love them, but they do not love you. We are not towards you the way you are towards us, and we never have been. But we know the way you are towards us. We've lived the way you are towards us. Okay, we don't reciprocate that animosity, but we know that whether we reciprocate that animosity or not, you're going to be a certain kind of way with us. We know that. It's like people who don't speak the same language. In fact, that's a good example. It's like people who don't speak the same language. You know how Americans will travel overseas and they'll get mad at the people in another country because they don't speak English. It's like that. Okay? We don't get mad at you for not speaking our language, but you get mad at us for not speaking your language, just like American tourists. So there's really no point in dealing with you. It's not going to go well. And here I'm not talking about linguistic language, obviously, but the language of character, the language of morality and belief. We know you don't speak our language in this regard, and that's fine. You have your language, that's fine. But you insist that we speak your language in this regard. So ultimately, we just don't really need to mingle with each other. It's not going to work out. So if you're a non-Muslim and you support, for example, you support Palestine, okay, good. Support it. Support Palestine. You should. Stand for what's right. Denounce injustice. But don't frame that as allyship with us. You're not our allies. You're just human beings who are, in this instance, like in this situation of Palestine, choosing not to side with evil. Okay, that's your moral obligation as a person of conscience. It doesn't make you one of us. It doesn't mean that now we have to bend our principles to keep your approval. You go talk to your own people. Deal with your own folk. That's what I'm saying. You don't have to come and link arms with us. It's your own people who are committing this genocide. It's your own people who pretty much committed every genocide. So you go ahead and you talk to your people if you are genuinely against what they are doing. You have that team meeting, okay? You try to talk them out of being evil because you think it's the right thing to do. Don't make it like you're doing us a favor. Because I'll tell you what, I don't personally trust anyone who comes out as pro-Palestine and who's, constantly trying to get all up under the Muslims. This isn't a cultural exchange program. Now we got to try and make you feel welcome and whatnot. Because, unless you're on the path to converting to Islam, well, there's no need for you to be all up under, in Muslim spaces. There's no need. And if getting access to our spaces is your condition for supporting Palestine, well, then we know what you're really about. You're just using the issue of Palestine to try to pick the lock so that you can infiltrate our communities. And yes, the same goes for Muslims. The same goes for Muslims. Muslims who are always trying to get all up under the Kuffar. We can't trust you either. We can work separately, no problem. We don't need you to represent us. We don't need you to explain us. We don't need you to humanize us. We don't need you to love us. We don't need you, period. And that's not an insult. But I know that you'll think it is, which just goes back to what I was saying about all of the qualities that are intrinsic in your Kuffar that make you need us to be beneath you. They need us to celebrate you, to cherish you, to overvalue you. You're radioactive. You can't help it, but you are. And anybody who gets close to you is going to get radiation poisoning. That's just the way it is. You know, you have to understand that about yourselves, and we Muslims have to understand that about you. You know, it's like the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about a man who has a friend. One of the friends has a perfume shop, and another friend is a blacksmith. So when he goes to visit that first friend, he leaves that visitation smelling like perfume, and he carries that fragrance everywhere he goes. But when he visits the blacksmith, well, he leaves smelling like coal, smelling like smoke, and the stench follows him everywhere. I mean, this actually applies in real physical terms when we're talking about non-Muslims, I'm sorry to say. Your hygiene isn't like our hygiene, let's be honest. Or you can hang around with a non-Muslim and find your clothes covered with cat hair, covered with dog hair. Their car smells like McDonald's. They might have alcohol on their breath, who knows what. You know, when COVID came along in 2019, 2020, people had to be taught how to wash their hands. In 2020, I mean, come on. But spiritually and psychologically and intellectually, it's the same effect. Just like the smoke from the blacksmith. Your mind gets clouded, you know? The smoke gets in your eyes. You can't see clearly. You get confused because of the confusion that pervades the lives of non-Muslims, non-believers. The moral confusion, the psychological confusion. But when you come back and spend time with other Muslims, you get that perfume again. You get that clarity, that spiritual and psychological hygiene. That's how it feels. That's how it really feels. And there's a reason for that. Order and clarity cannot ally with chaos and confusion. It just doesn't work. We have to concentrate on ourselves, on what we have to do. And the solution to our issues is not going to come from the West or from Westerners or from non-Muslims. You need to get that out of your head. Like I say, Jeffrey Sachs is not your friend. Mearsheimer is not your friend. Ritter and Galloway and the rest of them, these are not your friends. Now, to some extent, I will make a difference. I do make a difference between the non-Muslim Westerners who craft public opinion, who push narratives, and the non-Muslim Westerners who just receive those opinions and believe those narratives. You know, individual non-Muslims can be exceptions to the rule. There's no doubt about that. But you'd be a fool if you went through life on the basis of exceptions to the rule. You know, if you go into every situation expecting the people that you're going to interact with to be completely different than most of the people who come from where those people come from, who come from that same background, who come from that same country, who come from that same upbringing, you'd be a fool to expect them to be different. I mean, yes, some lions and bears are tamed and trained and aren't dangerous at all, but you can't ever assume that anytime you might encounter one. And if anyone gets offended by me telling Muslims that they should be cautious, that they should be aloof, that they should work separately, that they should not trust easily, well, that just exposes your real intentions as far as I'm concerned. Because nobody ever wants you to let your guard down unless they're planning to strike you. And we've been struck so many times. I think anyone who is actually sincere would completely understand why we would and why we should keep our guard up. If you're a non-Muslim Westerner and it hurts your feelings for Muslims and for non-Westerners to be suspicious about you, well, blame your own so-called civilization and blame your own history. Don't blame us for learning the lessons from that history.